Today's episode of Warframe Wednesday is going to be locked and loaded with some pretty serious spoilers. We're not really going to go too deep into anything, but the fact that I'm going to mention some of this stuff at all could potentially ruin your future experiences with Warframe. So if you are playing the game as a new player, someone who's maybe only got 20, even 50 hours into the game, you haven't made it to the Nata quest or past that, I really do strongly recommend you walk away right now. In fact, I insist you do if you're at all serious about spending more time with Warframe. There's a lot of wonder and mystery and discovery to be had in the future of Warframe that makes the game very special. I wouldn't want to strip that away from any of you new Warframe players. So please, leave the room, go watch another video, come back at another point in time, and have yourself a nice day. Alright, for the rest of you guys, let's move forward because today we're going to talk quite a bit about how my Warframe experience has evolved and how my perspective of the game has been altered by that evolution after my first 100 hours. Now, when I say 100 hours, I do actually mean 100 hours for me, but of course that length of time could be shorter for some players, could be longer for other players. I personally set out on an endeavor to play as much of the game as possible solo. My plan was always to at least get to the beginning of the second Dream solo and really experience the game in the rawest form, really get a good feel for the progression system and the learning curve without the assistance of other players, especially when it came to combat and overall mission difficulty. And I was able to do that for the most part all the way up until like the 80-hour mark. It was at that point I started prepping for the second Dream, getting some of the other resources I needed, and finishing up some of the nodes to go to new planets, that I started finally playing with some old friends who are actively playing Warframe and joined up with their clan. So I really want to talk about how that experience is sort of transformed, basically from the time that I spent from 0 to 80 to the time that I spent from 80 to 100, because Warframe has become a very different game for me. And this is, I think, the point in time that so many players want to get to, don't know they want to get to, but would definitely benefit from getting to. You know, that's just kind of the nature of Warframe, is that it's a game that really does take this long to get to a point where you're like, okay, I actually have a basic understanding for how the core gameplay loops, and I think that really alters your perspective. Now, there are, of course, other things that I think alter your perspective, including the introduction of some serious storytelling elements through the Nata quest, the second Dream. I know War Within's going to continue all of that. I haven't played any of that, so please don't spoil any of that for me. I have finished the second Dream, though. So let's actually start by talking about how the second Dream has affected me as a Warframe player. Now, before the second Dream, I had already reached a pretty solid understanding of the core gameplay loop of Warframe. So I already knew, like, at that point in time, what I could be doing and how I could do many of the things that I now knew I wanted to do. But I still hadn't really developed a sort of emotional hook beyond the progression systems, beyond the concept of unlocking and earning things. Now, that obviously went a long way for me, and I was pretty invested in the game at that point. But it was that emotional bond, that emotional connection that Warframe established with me during the second Dream that I think really sealed the deal and was like, okay, I am a Warframe player now. Like, this is a game that I want to spend 100 more hours with and well beyond that. It's not as if the second Dream is like unbelievably unique and mind-blowing, but it is an incredibly well-delivered piece of storytelling, and I think more importantly, a much-needed piece of storytelling. Had there been something similar, I'm not saying move the second Dream to the beginning of the game for new players, but had there been other powerfully story-driven experiences earlier on in my Warframe experience, I think that would have propelled me through the game much more quickly and in a much more enjoyable fashion. I think I would have found myself further invested in the larger Warframe experience, and it probably would have created an environment where it was easier for me to overcome Warframe's many barriers for entry. Like, I like that Warframe is difficult and that there's a lot to learn. It has a certain depth that carries a lot of value, especially as you get into the late game, that could indeed be damaged if it was altered for the sake of making the early game more easy or more progression worthy. So instead, I think it would make a lot of sense if DE just went back at some point in time when they had the time and the resources and started to bake in more of these story-driven experiences in the same way that they've improved the tutorial and bits and pieces of the new player experience through guidance, to actually add story to that then and to reestablish the beginning of the game in some sense, I think could be very powerful for the new player experience. And again, it could be the hook that early game desperately needs, man, because the game isn't really giving you anything. It's not giving you Warframes. It's not giving you anything. It's making you work for all of it. So to have one thing that's sort of there to guide you through that experience emotionally, to build a connection, I think would be really powerful. But that all put aside, there's no doubt that the Second Dream has an incredible amount of weight and value and heft and power behind it, because it exists 100 quote-unquote hours into the game for someone like myself. Like, to get that far into any experience and suddenly have this whole world cracked open for you, and to make a character at the 100-hour mark is a very powerful and special thing. No doubt that most of it comes from just the sort of development process that Warframe has gone through, but nonetheless, the side effect of that is a very uniquely placed experience done like no other game really ever has before. And it's at that point in time when suddenly Warframe means a lot more to you as an individual. There's a greater understanding for the lore, the world of Warframe, the universe, and you can then start to actually question things within the game, like, why am I killing this faction? Why am I killing these people? You know, it creates a lot of questions that are answered by the time you finish the Second Dream, but it also creates a bunch of other questions that go unanswered. Maybe they'll be answered in the War Within, I don't know yet, but right now, that's the place I'm in. And that's to me, that's a good thing, right? You don't want the Second Dream to be the beginning and the end of all of the story that you ever need to know when it comes to Warframe. But what it did very well was it managed to be the beginning of your interest in the greater Warframe universe. And suddenly you're like, oh wow, dude, there's this whole history and this backstory, and you know, now I fully understand the difference between a Tenno, you know, the operator, and a Warframe, and I can now just kind of have a different sense of everything. Everything feels a little bit different. I'm emotionally connected to the bits and pieces of this game in a different way than I was before. That's what I think makes the Second Dream very powerful from a storytelling perspective. I'm going to talk a lot more about how it was delivered, because I think they did a fantastic job with some of the gameplay components, but we're going to save that for another video focused entirely on the Second Dream coming in the next few weeks, because it absolutely deserves it. Let's roll things back to just before I did the Second Dream, and also the time after I did the Second Dream, and let's talk about my now understanding of the core gameplay loop. I think even if you start playing Warframe with a friend who's played Warframe substantially, you still won't ever really understand everything you understand after you get to that 100-hour mark. Like, someone could explain things to you, and they could even do it in a way that avoids spoilers and makes sure that you learn the game on your own. But I think it's still going to take you a huge chunk of time, 50+ hours potentially, even with assistance, to really understand it, to suddenly have that moment where everything clicks and you totally get the core loop of Warframe. You understand how the progression system works. And now, rather than being, you know, just in the middle of a lake drowning with all of this deep, dark water around you, vaguely feeling like there is something worth exploring in that deep, dark water, you're now in that deep, dark water with all the necessary gadgets and the mindset to actually explore it. Because that's the first 80 hours of Warframe. That was my first 80 hours of Warframe, was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? Where's like the progression and reward loop here? You know, I think this game looks cool. I love DE. Obviously, I'm invested in the game to some extent. I love that they were able to sort of take their original vision for Dark Sector and make the game they've always wanted to make. Like, I can appreciate all those things as someone who appreciates games, and that's kind of been my only hook, right? So that's the first 80 hours for me, is just like confusion and mystery and wading through this deep, dark lake of like, dude, I just don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm doing. You suddenly reach that point when you build your first Warframe, and you start to really unlock the nodes in the planet, and you start farming for resources on specific locations. And suddenly, you actually have locations that you go to on Ceres to farm for credits, or to farm for a certain resource. You know, you suddenly have a very clear understanding, and now, where you spent the first 80+ hour of the game with 2 Warframes, one of which was, you know, free, you suddenly are building multiple frames, and like, wow, I got 3 Warframes, you know, sitting in my foundry right now, and I've been playing Valkyr, and I'm starting to actually worry about how do I build out better duration and sustain for Hysteria. You know, the game truly opens up at that 100-hour mark. It's no longer wading through this mysterious dark water. It's a matter of looking into that mysterious dark water and plucking out the things you want to do and figuring out how to do them best, or how to do them the way you want to do them. And that is when the Warframe experience truly opens up and becomes this really deep RPG-driven looter shooter. And frankly, when we compare it to every other looter shooter on the market, yes, one can say, I think, at face value that this is a game with just more grind, but having now played 100 hours of the game, I don't think that's the case at all. There may be things in Warframe that are intentionally long to acquire, like waiting for a Warframe to be crafted, or having a limit to the number of a certain resource that you can gather to make a prime, for example. You know, right now I have a friend working on Vauban Prime, and he can only gather 4 of, I forget which resource it is, but 4 a day, basically. So he's got to spend a whole week each and every day pretty much always being there to farm them if he wants to craft this prime frame. You could say that's unnecessary grind, but I think the thing with Warframe is that there's constantly so much to do for probably the first 1,000 hours in the game. Let me just throw an estimate out there. That it never feels like a grind. It always just feels like a matter of, I've got so many things on my plate that I can just constantly go do something else while something else is being done. It's a really great way of making sure that the player doesn't all of a sudden unlock 50% of the content in one day, while also making sure they don't feel like they're just waiting around doing nothing, waiting for numbers to roll, waiting for timers to end. I mean, that's just not the case once you get into Warframe. You're just always doing something else while you wait for something else to be completed or something else to happen so you can start doing something else. It's a fantastically well-delivered experience in that sense, and it really does blow the core mechanics of every other looter shooter out of the water. Like, there are looter shooters in the market right now that want to have this long lifespan that Warframe has managed to achieve for its individual players, you know, thousands of hours, without having to constantly build out, you know, really expensive content that those games wish they could do, that those games should be looking at Warframe to learn how to do. They should be accepting that, listen, there's a lot of us doing looter shooters. Some of us are doing good, some of us are really struggling, especially in the long game. Why aren't we looking at a developer like DE and saying, they've clearly wrapped their head around it? Maybe not 100%, no one's perfect, no one's got all the answers, but they've wrapped their head around it a lot more than we have. That was just one of those big sort of like, wow, DE does get it more than everyone else. So I haven't really felt at all in the last 20 hours especially like I've been grinding at anything. You know, I've just got so much more to learn. And Warframe at that point also delivers a very interesting sort of honeymoon experience. So when you play a brand new game, like a game that also exists in sort of a newer genre, like the first time that I played Destiny, the first time I played Gears of War, the first time I played Counter-Strike, these are things that are incredibly new to you within their respective genres or as they establish a new genre. And you go through that honeymoon phase of like genuine excitement, genuinely feeling like this is something fresh and new, right? And now even if you move on and you still love that game, you move into the realm of familiarity. Like, okay, I don't really remember what it was like to be in that honeymoon phase. Like, I vaguely have that sensation. I kind of remember it from a nostalgic perspective. I remember being excited. I remember the emotions vaguely, but I don't actually remember what it felt like to not be familiar with this experience. Most games that are allowed to do that, that are allowed to break the mold enough to feel like that, only allow that honeymoon, or that honeymoon only lasts for like 2 to 10 hours at most, right? Most games you can establish a relatively good sense of knowing everything within that 2 to 10 hour period. Warframe takes like 50 plus, and then it moves you into a second stage, another honeymoon. It's like going on 2 honeymoons. The first one's done. Okay, well, now we're going to Alaska. We were just in Hawaii. Let's go to Alaska. Let's indulge in the cold, right? And that's the point where I'm at now, because my focus is now on building out mods better, understanding mods better. I'm looking at all those weapons now, and I'm looking at all the frames I have, and I'm asking myself how I can spec them correctly. I'm asking myself, what's the difference between critical chance and status? Which one is more important for me right now, not only based on the weapon that I'm looking at, or the frame, or the damage that I'm looking at, but also the mods that I currently have, because I don't have all the mods in the world. I'm not that far along. I can't just go to my mod pool and be like, well, I want to spec for this, so just plug those mods in, right? I have to look at either acquiring those mods, or I have to look at making do with what I have. It's a very interesting position that I find myself in, knowing now what the future holds for me and where I can go in terms of all the future mods, Prime mods, and Riven mods. I'm now here in this middle ground, like, okay, let's just learn this stuff, and let's use this as the perfect opportunity to make do with what I have and to better understand that concept that so many Warframe vets preach, the idea that pretty much everything can work in a certain situation if you want to make it work, that there is really no one perfect answer. Embrace the fact that there is a variety of ways in which you can do things and a variety of things that you can use to do the things you want to do. So it's cool. It's cool to transition from not knowing anything really, struggling, to having a really good understanding and feeling like there's so much more to do, right? It's that idea of being back in that lake I talked about and having all the necessary gear to start exploring that lake to your heart's content and discovering all of its mysteries and wonders, still knowing that there's so much more deep down there that you're going to get to at some point in time. I can see now how people easily spend thousands of hours in this game, and not because they're sitting around waiting for a Warframe to be crafted, but because they're sitting around just trying to figure things out and come up with new solutions to new problems or new solutions to old problems. I plan on hanging around Warframe for, I think, quite a while longer. I'll gladly put another 100, 200, 300 hours into this game. I'm having a lot of fun playing with a clan of good friends that I've been playing games with for the last like 6 years now, and the experience has kind of come full circle with me. So to each and every one of you who have sort of watched this journey, it's kind of reached its climax, but I think that climax is going to go on for a very long time, and I'm very much going to continue to make Warframe content, to talk about my future with the game, to talk about my first-hand experiences with different Warframes, and also to talk quite a bit more about future missions that I do, including obviously talking about the Second Dream, talking about with War Within, and all of the other things I'm going to stumble into down the road. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.